Chapter 1. Desperation. The wind howled through the narrow streets of Eldritch Hollow like a mourning widow, carrying whispers of forgotten tales and lost souls. In this small, time-worn town, nestled between dense forests and rolling hills that seemed to swallow the horizon, every creaking sign and flickering street lamp told a story of a past never truly buried. Alan Grayson sat hunched over a tattered notebook in the corner of the Drunken Horse, the only pub that still clung to life in Eldritch Hollow. The dim light of a lone candle cast shadows on his face, deepening the lines of worry that had become his constant companions. Around him, the usual crowd drowned their sorrows in cheap ale, their laughter as hollow as the town's name. Once a man with bright eyes and dreams that reached beyond the town's stifling grip, Alan now found himself trapped in a life that was a mere shadow of what he had hoped for. His job at the local factory, which had promised stability, was now hanging by a thread, victim to the relentless march of progress that had forgotten places like Eldritch Hollow. Debts piled up like unwelcome letters, and the weight of unfulfilled promises kept him awake at night. "Another one, Alan?" Old Pete, the bartender, asked, his voice a gruff melody of concern and resignation. Pete had watched Alan grow from a spirited youth into the man he was now, a regular at the end of the bar, nursing a drink and a bruised spirit. Alan nodded without looking up, his hand absently tracing the rim of his empty glass. "Thanks, Pete," he murmured, his voice barely rising above the whispers of the wind outside. As Pete poured another drink, Alan's gaze drifted to the window. The reflection staring back at him was a stranger, a man worn down by life, his eyes holding a haunting mix of desperation and defeat. He quickly looked away, his heart aching with a familiar sting of regret. The pub door creaked open, drawing Alan's attention. A group of teenagers stumbled in, their laughter piercing the pub's usual murmur. They huddled around a table, their youthful energy a stark contrast to the weary regulars. "You hear about the old legend of Mr. Black?" one of the teens said loudly, leaning across the table with wide, excited eyes. "They say he can grant you any wish, for a price." Alan's ears pricked up at the mention of Mr. Black, a name that had always been whispered in Eldritch Hollow with a mix of fear and curiosity. The legend of Mr. Black was as old as the town itself, a tale of a mysterious figure who could make the impossible happen for those desperate enough to strike a deal. "Don't tell me you believe in that crap, Jake," another teen scoffed, rolling his eyes. Chapter 2. The Uninvited Guest. The wind outside the Drunken Horse grew into a mournful howl, weaving through the streets of Eldritch Hollow like a restless spirit. Inside, the pub's patrons huddled closer, finding comfort in the warmth of shared stories and flickering candlelight. Alan, lost in his thoughts, paid little attention to the tales being spun around him. The name Mr. Black, however, lingered in his mind, an unwelcome intruder that refused to leave. Tom Baker, sitting across from Alan with a pint in hand, noticed his preoccupation. "You look like you've seen a ghost, Alan. That story about Mr. Black got you spooked?" Alan offered a weak smile. "Just an old legend, right?" he replied, though his tone lacked conviction. Tom leaned forward, his voice dropping to a hushed tone. "Some say there's more truth to that legend than most believe. I've seen folks get obsessed with it, and it never ends well. Best to leave such things alone." As the night stretched on, the patrons began to trickle out, leaving Alan and a few others in the dimly lit pub. That's when the door creaked open, ushering in a gust of cold air that snuffed out several candles. A tall figure stepped inside, his presence immediately commanding the room's attention. The stranger was sharply dressed, his suit impeccably tailored, contrasting starkly with the worn and faded interior of the pub. His eyes, dark and penetrating, scanned the room before settling on Alan. Alan felt a chill run down his spine. There was something unsettling about the man, an air of danger masked by a veneer of charm. The stranger approached, taking the seat recently vacated by Tom. "Good evening," he said, his voice smooth and confident. "You're Alan Grayson, aren't you?" Alan, taken aback, nodded slowly. "Do I know you?" The stranger smiled, a gesture that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Not yet, but I believe we have mutual interests. You may call me Mr. Black." The blood drained from Alan's face. This couldn't be the same Mr. Black from the legends. It was impossible. Yet here he was, as real as the glass in Alan's trembling hand. "I understand you're looking for a way out of your current predicaments," Mr. Black continued, his gaze piercing through Alan's defenses. "I offer solutions to those brave enough to seek them." Alan's heart raced. This had to be a coincidence, a cruel joke perhaps, but the intensity in Mr. Black's eyes suggested otherwise. "I don't know what you're talking about," Alan stammered, trying to dismiss the conversation. Mr. Black leaned in closer. "Come now, Alan. We both know that's not true. You're at your wit's end, desperate for a change. I can offer that change for a price." The very air around them seemed to grow heavier, charged with an unspoken promise of dark and forbidden things. Alan knew he should walk away, ignore the man and his outlandish claims. Yet, a part of him, the part that had nothing left to lose, was tempted. "What kind of price?" Alan found himself asking, despite every instinct screaming against it. Mr. Black's smile widened. "All in due time, Alan. For now, consider what you desire most. I'll be in touch." With that, Mr. Black rose from his seat and strode out of the pub, leaving a trail of whispered questions and uneasy glances in his wake. Alan sat frozen, his mind racing with fear, doubt, and an undeniable spark of hope. The legend of Mr. Black was no longer just a story, and Alan's life had just taken an unimaginable turn. Chapter 3. Whispers in the Shadows. The encounter with Mr. Black left Alan in a state of unease that clung to him like a second skin. He lay in his bed that night, staring at the ceiling, the shadows seeming to shift and dance in the corners of his room. Sleep was a stranger, and his thoughts were a turbulent sea, churning with what-ifs and maybes. Morning came with no relief. The town of Eldritch Hollow was draped in a thick fog, its streets desolate and unwelcoming. As Alan walked through the town, he felt the weight of 100 unseen eyes watching him, whispers of the previous night's encounter with Mr. Black already spreading like wildfire. At the local diner, Alan overheard hushed conversations, the name Mr. Black repeated with a mix of fear and curiosity. He sank deeper into his seat, a cup of untouched coffee growing cold before him. The town had always thrived on gossip and legends, but now he was at the center of it, entangled in a story that was quickly spiraling beyond his control. "Tough night, huh?" The voice belonged to Lily Evans, a young woman who worked at the diner. She had a kind smile that reached her eyes, a rarity in Eldritch Hollow. "You look like you've seen a ghost." Alan managed a weak smile. "Just didn't sleep well," he lied, avoiding her gaze. Lily poured him a fresh cup of coffee. "You know, this town loves its mysteries, but sometimes it's just people with too much time on their hands. Don't let the rumors get to you." Alan nodded, appreciating her attempt at comfort. But Mr. Black was no rumor, and the fear and temptation he had stirred in Alan were all too real. The rest of the day passed in a blur. Alan tried to focus on his job at the factory, but his mind was elsewhere, caught in the web that Mr. Black had spun. The more he tried to dismiss the encounter as a figment of his imagination, the more he found himself drawn to the possibility of what Mr. Black had offered. That evening, Alan found himself wandering the streets of Eldritch Hollow, drawn inexorably back to the spot where he had first heard the legend, the ancient gnarled tree on the outskirts of town. The tree stood silent and imposing, its branches like twisted arms reaching out to the heavens. As he stood there, a figure emerged from the fog. Joe Harris, a man whose life had been a cautionary tale ever since his own rumored encounter with Mr. Black years ago. "Careful what you wish for," Joe said, his voice a raspy whisper, his eyes hollow. "The price is never what it seems." Alan looked at Joe, seeing the embodiment of the town's whispered warnings. "What happened to you?" he asked, a part of him not sure he wanted to know the answer. Joe's laugh was a dry, bitter sound. "I got what I wanted, or so I thought. But the cost, it was more than I bargained for. Mr. Black has a way of twisting desires into nightmares." The warning settled in Alan's chest like a stone. He wanted to believe he was different, that he could outsmart Mr. Black. But looking at Joe, a living ghost of regret, Alan wasn't so sure anymore. As he walked back home, the whispers of the town seemed louder and the shadows deeper. Mr. Black's offer hung over him like a dark cloud. Desire and dread warred within him, each step taking him further into uncertainty. Eldritch Hollow had always been a town of secrets and shadows, but now Alan was a part of its darkest legend. And as the night closed in, he couldn't shake the feeling that his life was no longer his own. Chapter 5. The Tempting Offer. The next morning dawned gray and overcast, mirroring the turmoil in Alan's heart. He walked through the streets of Eldritch Hollow with a sense of inevitability, each step taking him closer to a decision that felt both terrifying and necessary. As he passed the gnarled tree on the outskirts of town, the sight of his first encounter with Mr. Black, a sense of dread mixed with an unexplainable draw enveloped him. He couldn't shake the feeling that his fate was somehow tied to this ancient, twisted sentinel. Lost in thought, Alan barely noticed the figure approaching him until he was only a few feet away. It was Mr. Black, emerging from the morning mist, his presence as commanding as ever. "Good morning, Alan. Have you considered my offer?" Mr. Black's voice was smooth, almost soothing, but it sent a shiver down Alan's spine. Alan took a deep breath, his decision made. "Yes, I have. I need a way out of my troubles, but I'm afraid of the cost." Mr. Black smiled, a predator confident in its catch. "Fear is natural but unnecessary. I assure you, the price is a mere trifle compared to what you stand to gain. A small favor, nothing more." "And what is this favor?" Alan asked, his voice tinged with both curiosity and apprehension. Mr. Black's eyes seemed to pierce into Alan's soul. "In due time, Alan. First tell me your heart's deepest desire, and I will make it happen." Alan hesitated, the weight of his words heavy on his tongue. "I want to be free from my debts, from the constant struggle. I want a fresh start, a chance to live a life not burdened by past mistakes." Mr. Black nodded, as if he had heard such pleas many times before. "A simple enough request. It shall be done. But remember, when I call upon you to fulfill your end of the bargain, you must comply without question." Alan felt a cold knot form in his stomach. "And if I refuse?" The air around them grew colder as Mr. Black leaned in, his voice a menacing whisper. "That would be unwise. My deals are binding, Alan, and the consequences of breaking them are severe." Alan swallowed hard, the reality of his situation setting in. He was making a deal with a being whose motives and powers were beyond his understanding, but the allure of escaping his current life was too strong to resist. "I understand," Alan said, a sense of resignation washing over him. "Excellent," Mr. Black replied, his smile widening. "You'll find that your financial troubles will soon be a thing of the past. Enjoy your newfound freedom, Alan. I will be in touch." With those final words, Mr. Black turned and disappeared into the mist as silently as he had arrived. Alan stood alone under the gnarled tree, a sense of unease mingling with a cautious relief. He had made his deal, crossed a line from which there was no return. As he walked back into town, the burden of his debts felt lighter, but the weight of the unknown favor he owed loomed ominously. The whispers of the town seemed louder, the shadows deeper, and Alan knew that his life had irrevocably changed. He had sought the devil, and the devil had answered. Chapter 6. Unsettling Changes. The days following his deal with Mr. Black brought a surreal calm to Alan's life. His debts, which had loomed over him like a dark cloud, were mysteriously cleared. The bank informed him of an unexpected and anonymous settlement of his accounts. It was a miracle, one that should have filled him with joy. Yet the relief was tainted by a nagging dread of the unknown price he would eventually pay. Alan tried to resume a normal life, but the fabric of his existence had altered. The townsfolk, who had always been distant, now regarded him with a mix of envy and suspicion. Rumors swirled around him like autumn leaves in the wind. Some whispered that he had come into an unexpected inheritance. Others speculated darker, more sinister sources. His nights were restless, filled with strange, unsettling dreams. Visions of shadowy figures and twisted trees plagued him, and he would wake up in a cold sweat, the echo of Mr. Black's voice lingering in his ears. One evening, as Alan closed up at the factory, he was startled by the sudden appearance of Lily Evans. Her usual cheerful demeanor was replaced by a look of concern. "Alan, can we talk?" she asked, her voice hesitant. "Sure, Lily, is everything okay?" Alan replied, trying to mask his own unease. Lily bit her lip, her eyes searching his. "It's about all this talk in town, about how your fortunes changed overnight. People are saying things, strange things. I just want to make sure you're okay." Alan forced a smile. "I'm fine, Lily. Just some unexpected luck, that's all." But Lily wasn't convinced. "Just be careful, Alan. This town, it has a way of turning on people. And there are stories, old stories, that make me worry for you." Her words sent a chill down his spine. Alan wanted to reassure her, to tell her there was nothing to worry about, but the lie tasted bitter in his mouth. "Thanks, Lily. I'll keep that in mind. Just to let you know, I've been speaking to Sarah Lane, and she offered some guidance," he said, hoping that may reassure her. "Sarah Lane?" Lily said, confused. "Alan, who are you talking about? You know what? It doesn't matter. I need to get going. Just don't trust anyone right now." Before Alan could reply back, she left. He felt a profound sense of isolation. The deal he had made was like a barrier between him and the rest of the world, a secret that cast a long shadow over everything he did. The following day brought an unexpected visitor to his doorstep. Joe Harris stood there, his eyes holding a depth of sadness and understanding. "Can I come in?" Joe asked, his voice rough. Alan hesitated, but then stepped aside, allowing Joe to enter. They sat in the small living room, a space that suddenly felt too close, too real. "I heard about your good fortune," Joe began, his gaze steady, "and I know about Mr. Black." Alan's heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean?" Joe sighed, a sound heavy with regret. "I made a deal with him years ago. It cost me everything, my family, my peace of mind. I'm here to warn you, Alan. The price he asks, it's never worth it." Alan felt a knot of fear in his stomach. "What did he ask you to do?" he asked, not sure he wanted to hear the answer. Joe's eyes darkened. "It started small, a favor here, a task there, but it quickly spiraled into something horrible. He makes you think you have a choice, but you don't. Not really." Chapter 7. The Favor. The unease that had taken root in Alan's life since his deal with Mr. Black grew with each passing day. He felt like a pawn in a game he barely understood, his every move shadowed by the anticipation of the price he had yet to pay. One chilly evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of crimson and gold, Mr. Black appeared again. He materialized seemingly out of nowhere as Alan was walking home, his presence as unsettling as ever. "Good evening, Alan," Mr. Black greeted, his voice smooth and calm. "I trust you have been enjoying the fruits of our agreement." Alan's throat tightened. "Yes," he managed to say, "but I know there's a price. What is it you want from me?" Mr. Black's eyes glinted in the fading light. "Ah, straight to business. I admire that. My request is quite simple. There's a house on the outskirts of town, old and abandoned. I need you to retrieve something from it for me." Alan frowned. "Retrieve what?" "A small wooden box. You'll find it hidden in the attic. Bring it to me, and our deal will be complete," Mr. Black explained, his gaze never leaving Alan's face. Alan hesitated. The task seemed too easy, almost mundane, especially compared to the tales of twisted favors he had heard. "Why can't you get it yourself?" he asked, suspicion creeping into his voice. Mr. Black smiled, a cold, humorless curve of his lips. "Let's just say there are rules, even for someone like me. Consider it part of our agreement. Do this for me and you'll be free of your debt." The idea of being free from the deal was enticing, but Alan couldn't shake off the feeling that there was more to this favor than Mr. Black let on. "And if I refuse?" The air around them seemed to drop a few degrees as Mr. Black's demeanor darkened. "I would strongly advise against that, Alan. Our deal is binding, and breaking it would have dire consequences." Alan weighed his options. The request seemed harmless enough, but with Mr. Black there was always a catch. However, The desire to be free from the ominous hold of the deal was too strong. "All right," Alan agreed reluctantly. "I'll do it." "Excellent," Mr. Black said, his smile returning. "I'll be waiting." With that, he vanished as quickly as he had appeared, leaving Alan alone with a growing sense of dread. The following night, armed with a flashlight and a crowbar, Alan stood before the old house Mr. Black had described. The building loomed like a specter, its windows dark and empty, the silence around it oppressive. Taking a deep breath, Alan forced himself to enter. The house groaned and creaked around him, as if protesting his intrusion. Dust motes danced in the beam of his flashlight, and cobwebs draped the walls like shrouds. The attic was just as foreboding, a cramped space filled with forgotten memories and discarded belongings. After what felt like hours of searching, Alan's hand finally brushed against a small wooden box hidden beneath a pile of old clothes. The moment he touched it, a wave of unease washed over him. The box was ornately carved, its surface cold to the touch. Alan couldn't shake off the feeling that it was far more than just a container. With the box securely in his possession, Alan hurried out of the house, each step quickened by the desire to be done with this whole affair. He didn't stop until he was safely out of the house, the night air feeling like a reprieve. As he walked home, the box tucked under his arm, Alan couldn't help but wonder what secrets it held. What had he just retrieved for Mr. Black, and what consequences would it bring? But one thought overshadowed all others, the hope that, once he handed this box over, his deal with Mr. Black would finally be over. Chapter 8. Questions. The night after retrieving the mysterious box for Mr. Black was one of the longest in Alan's life. The box, with its intricate carvings and chilling touch, sat on his kitchen table, an object of both fascination and fear. Alan was tempted to open it to uncover its secrets, but a deep-rooted apprehension held him back. As dawn broke, casting a pale light through the curtains, Alan decided he couldn't wait any longer. He had to complete his part of the deal, to end this chapter of his life. With the box tucked under his arm, he set out to find Mr. Black. The town of Eldritch Hollow was waking up, its streets quiet and empty. The air was crisp, the sky a clear blue, but Alan barely noticed. His thoughts were consumed by the box and the enigmatic figure who had sent him to retrieve it. He found Mr. Black waiting for him in the same spot by the gnarled tree on the outskirts of town. The man seemed to be a part of the landscape, as timeless and unnatural as the twisted branches above. "Ah, you've returned," Mr. Black greeted, his eyes immediately locking onto the box in Alan's hands. "And you've brought what I asked for. Excellent." Alan held out the box, eager to be rid of it. "Here, I did what you asked. Now our deal is done, right?" Mr. Black took the box, his fingers caressing the carvings with an almost reverent touch. "Yes, Alan, our deal is complete. You've done well." Relief washed over Alan, followed swiftly by a wave of exhaustion. It felt as though a great burden had been lifted from his shoulders. "Can I ask what's in it?" he found himself saying. Mr. Black's gaze met his, a flicker of amusement in his dark eyes. "Some questions are better left unanswered, Alan, but rest assured, it's nothing that concerns you any longer." With the box now in Mr. Black's possession, Alan turned to leave, each step feeling lighter than the last. He was free from the deal, free from the weight of Mr. Black's presence in his life. As he walked back through the town, however, he couldn't shake off a nagging sense of unease. The box and its contents remained a mystery, one that gnawed at the edges of his mind. His path took him past the local library where he saw Sarah Lane through the window, her eyes deep in a book. On impulse, Alan entered, greeted by the familiar musty smell of old books. Sarah looked up, a hint of surprise crossing her features. "Back so soon? Find what you were looking for?" Alan hesitated, then decided to confide in her. "I retrieved something for Mr. Black. A wooden box. He said our deal was done, but I can't help feeling like there's more to it." Sarah's expression grew serious. "You've delved into dangerous waters, Alan. Mr. Black's items are never just trinkets. They're often tied to old powerful magic, echoes of the past with the potential to ripple into the future." Alan felt a cold shiver run down his spine. What kind of magic? Sarah closed her book, her gaze steady. The kind that's best left undisturbed. Eldritch Hollow has a long history with the supernatural, much of it best forgotten. If Mr. Black has taken interest in something here, it's likely for reasons only he understands. Alan left the library with more questions than answers. The town, with its creaking signs and whispering trees, seemed to hold secrets too deep, too dark for him to fathom. As he walked home, the echoes of Eldritch Hollow's past seemed to follow him, a reminder that some deals, once made, are never truly over. Chapter 9. A Town's Whispered Fears. The following days in Eldritch Hollow were marked by a subtle but unmistakable change. The town, always prone to gossip and superstition, seemed to buzz with a new intensity. Alan felt the weight of countless eyes upon him wherever he went, their whispers like cold fingers trailing down his spine. He tried to immerse himself in the routine of his daily life, but the sense of normalcy he longed for remained elusive. The debt relief, once a source of hope, now felt like a chain around his neck, a constant reminder of the deal he had made and the mysterious favor he had fulfilled. Alan's nights were restless, filled with dreams that were more nightmares than anything else. Visions of the old, abandoned house, the wooden box, and Mr. Black's piercing eyes haunted him, blurring the lines between sleep and wakefulness. One evening, as he sat at the Drunken Horse, trying to drown his unease in a pint of ale, he overheard a conversation that sent a chill down his spine. "They say he made a deal with the devil," one of the locals whispered, casting a furtive glance towards Alan. "No one's luck changes that fast without something wicked behind it." "Shh, he'll hear you," his companion muttered, lowering his voice. "There's more to that man than meets the eye. Best to stay clear." Alan's grip on his glass tightened, the murmured words feeding the growing paranoia inside him. He was no stranger to the town's love for tall tales, but being the subject of such tales was both unsettling and isolating. The next day brought an unexpected encounter that only deepened his sense of foreboding. As he walked through the market, he bumped into Lily Evans. Her usual warmth was replaced by a guarded expression, her eyes holding a mix of concern and fear. "Alan, can we talk?" she asked, her voice low. They found a quiet corner away from prying eyes. Lily's next words were hesitant, but they struck Alan like a physical blow. "People are scared, Alan. Scared of you, of the changes they've seen. There are rumors about where your luck came from, about your dealings with Mr. Black." Alan felt a knot of frustration and helplessness form in his stomach. "Lily, it's not what they think. I just needed a way out of my problems." "But at what cost, Alan?" Lily's question hung in the air, heavy with unspoken implications. Before Alan could respond, a commotion at the other end of the market drew their attention. A group of townsfolk had gathered around Sarah Lane, who was speaking animatedly, her face pale and her hands trembling. Curiosity and a sense of dread propelled Alan towards the crowd. He arrived in time to hear Sarah's words that sent a wave of cold realization over him. "It's happening again, just like before. The shadows are stirring and the old magic is awakening. We must be vigilant. The dealings with Mr. Black always come at a price, not just for the one who makes the deal, but for all of us." The crowd murmured in agreement, their faces a mix of fear and suspicion. Alan felt their eyes on him, their judgment like a tangible force. He left the market quickly, the echoes of Sarah's warning following him. The town, with its ancient secrets and whispered fears, seemed to close in on him. The deal he had made, once a beacon of hope, now felt like a dark cloud looming over his life. As he walked the familiar streets of Eldritch Hollow, Alan realized that the town's whispered fears were becoming his own. The shadows seemed darker, the whispers louder, and the sense of impending doom more oppressive than ever. The deal with Mr. Black had changed more than his fortunes. It had altered the very fabric of his existence, entwining his fate with the hidden currents of the town's dark past. Chapter 10. Shadows at the Door. The atmosphere in Eldritch Hollow had shifted palpably since Alan's deal with Mr. Black. The once indifferent townsfolk now regarded him with a mixture of suspicion and fear, their whispers creating an undercurrent of tension that Alan could feel in his bones. Trying to escape the stifling atmosphere of the town, Alan took to wandering the outskirts of Eldritch Hollow, where the oppressive whispers couldn't reach him. It was during one of these walks that he encountered Tom Baker, the ever-practical and grounded local who had always seemed immune to the town's superstitions. "Alan!" Tom called out, his voice tinged with a concern that was uncharacteristic of the usually stoic man. Alan stopped, surprised. "Tom, I didn't expect to see you out here." Tom approached, his brow furrowed. "I've been hearing things, Alan, disturbing things. The town's on edge, and a lot of that fear is centered around you." Alan sighed, a mixture of frustration and resignation in his voice. "I know, but it's not what they think. I made a deal, yes, but it was just to get out of debt. There's nothing more to it." Tom looked at him intently. "I wish I could believe that, but I've seen how these things play out. Deals with the likes of Mr. Black never end well. They ripple out, affect more than just the one who made the deal. Be careful, Alan. There are things in this town, old powers, that are best left undisturbed." The warning hung in the air as Tom walked away, leaving Alan alone with his thoughts. The sense of unease that had been growing inside him since the deal now felt like a living thing, gnawing at his peace of mind. Returning home, Alan found an envelope on his doorstep. It was plain, with no markings or return address. Inside was a single cryptic note. "The shadows grow longer, and the door has been opened. Be wary of what steps through." The message sent a shiver down Alan's spine. He looked around, half expecting to see someone watching him, but the street was empty, the silence unsettling. That night Alan lay in bed, the note's ominous words echoing in his mind. Sleep eluded him, and every creak of the old house set his nerves on edge. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was coming, something born from the dark deal he had made. In the early hours of the morning, a sound jolted him awake. It was a soft, insistent tapping, like fingers drumming against the window. Heart racing, Alan got up and cautiously approached the window. What he saw made his blood run cold. Outside, in the pale moonlight, were shadows. But these were no ordinary shadows. They moved and shifted, taking on vague humanoid forms that seemed to reach towards his window, towards him. Alan stumbled back, fear gripping him. This couldn't be real. It had to be a trick of the light, his imagination running wild. But as he watched, the shadowy figures continued their eerie dance, a silent, macabre performance that sent a clear message. Whatever he had unleashed with his deal was now manifesting in ways he couldn't begin to understand. The next morning the shadows were gone, but the terror they had instilled in Alan remained. He knew he couldn't ignore them, or the warning in the note. Something had been set in motion, something dark and dangerous, and he was at the center of it. Alan realized he needed help, but who could he turn to? The townsfolk were already wary of him, and he doubted they would believe his tale of shifting shadows and ominous notes. The only person who might understand was Sarah Lane, the town's historian, who seemed to know more about Mr. Black and the town's secrets than anyone else. Deciding to seek her out, Alan hoped she could shed light on the darkness that was encroaching on his life. As he set out to find Sarah, Alan couldn't shake the feeling that the shadows were still watching, biding their time, waiting for the right moment to step through the door he had unwittingly opened. Chapter 11. The Historian's Warning. Alan found Sarah Lane in the same corner of the local library where they had first spoken about Mr. Black. The elderly woman looked up from her book, her keen eyes quickly noting Alan's haggard appearance and anxious demeanor. "Alan, what brings you back so soon?" she asked, her voice laced with a hint of concern. He hesitated, the events of the past few nights replaying in his mind. "I need your help, Sarah. Strange things have been happening ever since I completed that task for Mr. Black." Sarah closed her book, gesturing to the chair opposite her. "Tell me everything." Alan recounted the shadows at his window and the cryptic note left on his doorstep. As he spoke, Sarah's expression grew increasingly grave. When he finished, she leaned back, her eyes thoughtful. "You've opened a door, Alan. A door that should have remained closed. Mr. Black is not just a simple dealer of favors. He's a catalyst for forces much older and darker than you can imagine. This town has a history of such occurrences, but they've been dormant for a long time. Until now. Alan felt a cold knot of fear in his stomach. What can I do? How do I close this door? Sarah shook her head slowly. It's not that simple. Once these forces are awakened, they seek to balance the scales, to claim what they believe is owed. Your deal with Mr. Black has set things in motion that are not easily undone. Is there anything I can do? Alan asked, desperation creeping into his voice. There may be a way, Sarah said, her tone cautious, but it requires understanding the nature of the deal you made and the entity you made it with. You need to know exactly what Mr. Black is and what he wants. And how do I find that out? Alan asked, feeling overwhelmed. You'll need to delve into the town's history, uncover the patterns and stories that have been buried over time. I can help guide you, but you must be prepared for what you might uncover. The truth behind Mr. Black and his kind is often more than one bargains for. Alan nodded, a sense of resolve settling over him. I'll do whatever it takes. I can't live like this with shadows lurking at my door. Sarah gave him a long, searching look. Be careful, Alan. Uncovering the past can be like walking through a spider's web. You may find yourself more entangled than before. With Sarah's guidance, Alan began his research into the town's history, poring over old books and records. The library became his refuge, a place where he could seek answers and, hopefully, a solution to the nightmare his life had become. As he delved deeper, he discovered tales of other townsfolk who had made deals with entities like Mr. Black, each story ending in tragedy and sorrow. He read about ancient rituals and forgotten lore, hints of a world that existed alongside their own, governed by rules and beings beyond human understanding. Each piece of information was a part of a larger, more ominous puzzle. Alan realized that his deal with Mr. Black was not just a personal mistake, but a part of a recurring cycle of darkness that had plagued Eldritch Hollow for generations. Determined to break this cycle, Alan continued his research, unaware that the shadows were still watching, patient and calculating, waiting for the moment to claim what they believed was owed. Their research led them to a series of Old Town records detailing various unexplained incidents that had occurred over the centuries. Each incident was linked, directly or indirectly, to a deal made with a mysterious figure. As Alan pieced together the information, a chilling picture began to emerge. The deals were not just isolated incidents, but part of a larger, more sinister tapestry. The entity known as Mr. Black was weaving a web that spanned generations, each strand a life ensnared by a desperate bargain. The question is, Alan mused aloud, what happens when this tapestry is complete? What is Mr. Black's endgame? That's what we need to find out before it's too late, Sarah replied, her tone grave. Their investigation took a sudden turn when Alan discovered an old map of Eldritch Hollow in the library's attic. The map depicted the town as it was centuries ago, with several landmarks that no longer existed. One landmark in particular caught his eye, an ancient stone circle on the outskirts of town, long since forgotten. I've seen this before, Alan said, tracing his finger over the map. In my dreams, the shadows, they always gather around this circle. Sarah leaned in, examining the map closely. This could be important. These stone circles were often sites of ancient power, used for rituals and summoning. A plan began to form in Alan's mind. What if we go there? Maybe we'll find something, some clue to help us. It's dangerous, Sarah warned, but it might be our only chance to uncover the truth. That night, armed with flashlights and the old map, Alan and Sarah made their way to the site of the ancient stone circle. The wind howled around them as they navigated through the dense woods, the storm casting an eerie pall over the landscape. When they finally arrived at the circle, the air was charged with an unspoken energy. The stones, worn and covered in moss, formed a perfect ring, their shadows looming like silent sentinels. As they stepped inside the circle, a sense of displacement washed over them, as if they had crossed into a realm where the normal rules of the world no longer applied. Alan could feel the eyes of the shadows on him, their presence more oppressive than ever. In the center of the circle, they found a series of carvings, worn by time but still discernible. The carvings depicted various figures making deals with a shadowy entity, and in the center, a large figure that Alan instinctively knew represented Mr. Black. "This is it," Alan whispered. "This is where it all connects." As they studied the carvings, trying to decipher their meaning, the wind around them grew stronger, whipping into a frenzy. The shadows at the edge of the circle began to stir, taking on more distinct forms. Alan and Sarah realized too late that they were not alone. The entity they had been researching, the very essence of the deals made throughout Eldritch Hollow's history, was manifesting before them. The shadows converged, forming a dark, swirling vortex, and from its depths, a familiar figure emerged, Mr. Black, his eyes gleaming with a malevolent intelligence. "You've been busy, Alan," Mr. Black said, his voice echoing around the stone circle, "but you cannot escape your fate. The deal has been made, and the price must be paid." Alan stepped forward, determination stealing his voice. "I won't let you harm this town any longer. I'll find a way to break the deal, to break your hold over Eldritch Hollow." Mr. Black laughed, a sound that sent chills down their spines. "Brave words, but you have no idea of the forces you are meddling with. Your deal was a mere thread in a much larger tapestry, one that has been woven through the ages. You cannot unravel it so easily." Sarah stepped beside Alan, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. "We know about the cycles, the patterns of your deals. We'll find a way to break them, to release this town from your grip." Mr. Black's gaze shifted to Sarah, his smile fading. "You underestimate the depth of the roots that bind these deals. They are ancient, as old as the town itself. But go ahead, try to untangle them. You will only ensnare yourself further." With those ominous words, Mr. Black dissolved back into the shadows, which retreated slowly, leaving the stone circle in an eerie calm. Alan and Sarah stood in silence, the weight of their encounter settling over them. It was clear now that breaking Alan's deal would not be enough. They needed to unravel the entire history of deals and pacts that Mr. Black had entwined around Eldritch Hollow. As they made their way back through the woods, the map and carvings from the stone circle in hand, they knew the journey ahead would be fraught with danger and revelations, but there was a glimmer of hope, a chance to free not just Alan but the entire town from the shadows that lurked at its edges. The storm had passed, leaving a clear, star-filled sky above them. In the distance, the lights of Eldritch Hollow twinkled, a town unaware of the battle that was being waged for its soul. Alan and Sarah understood that the real struggle was just beginning. The secrets of the past would have to be unearthed, and the cycle of deals broken. Only then could the shadows be banished, and the town released from the grip of Mr. Black. They walked on, determined to uncover the truth hidden in the shadows of Eldritch Hollow, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. Chapter 13. The Heart of Darkness. In the days that followed their encounter at the stone circle, Alan and Sarah delved deeper into the town's archives, piecing together fragments of history that painted a chilling portrait of Mr. Black's influence over Eldritch Hollow. They discovered accounts of past residents who, like Alan, had made desperate deals, each leaving a mark on the town's fabric. These stories were like puzzle pieces, and as they fit together, a sinister pattern emerged. Each deal seemed to strengthen Mr. Black, giving him more power to manipulate and control. As they worked, the shadows around Eldritch Hollow seemed to grow more bold and active. Whispered voices could be heard in the dead of night, and figures were seen lurking in the periphery, visible only out of the corner of one's eye. Despite the growing darkness, Alan felt a renewed sense of purpose. He was no longer a helpless pawn in Mr. Black's game. He was a key player in unraveling the mystery that bound the town. Their breakthrough came from an unlikely source, an old diary belonging to the town's founder, which Sarah found hidden in a forgotten compartment of the library's oldest section. The diary detailed the original pact made with Mr. Black, a deal struck at the founding of Eldritch Hollow for prosperity and protection. "It all started here," Alan said, his finger tracing the faded ink. "This is the original deal that set everything in motion." Sarah nodded, her eyes grave. And every deal since has been feeding into it, strengthening it. To break the cycle, we need to go back to the beginning, to the heart of the darkness. Armed with this new knowledge, they formulated a plan. They would perform a ritual at the stone circle, one that would sever the ties between Mr. Black and Eldritch Hollow, breaking the cycle of deals. The night of the ritual, Alan and Sarah gathered at the stone circle, the air thick with anticipation and fear. They had prepared everything according to the old rites described in the diary, but uncertainty hung over them like a shroud. As they began, the wind picked up, howling around the stones as if in protest. Shadows gathered at the edge of the circle, twisting and writhing in the darkness. Alan felt a surge of fear, but pushed it aside, focusing on the incantations. Sarah lit a series of candles placed around the circle, their flames flickering in the wind. Halfway through the ritual, a deep, booming laughter echoed around them. Mr. Black materialized at the edge of the circle, his presence more menacing than ever. "You think you can break the chains that have bound this town for centuries," he taunted, his voice a thunderous rumble. "You are mere mortals, playing at games you cannot comprehend." "We know the truth now," Alan shouted over the wind. "We know how it started, and we can end it." Mr. Black's laughter grew louder, the shadows intensifying around him. "Foolish boy, you have no idea of the powers you are meddling with. This town is mine. It has always been mine." But Alan and Sarah continued the ritual, their voices merging into a single powerful incantation. The candles blazed brighter, casting a protective glow around them. As they reached the climax of the ritual, a blinding light erupted from the center of the circle, enveloping Mr. Black and the shadows. Mr. Black let out a roar of rage and agony as the light consumed him, the shadows dissolving into nothingness. The light expanded, washing over the entire town, breaking the dark cloud that had hung over Eldritch Hollow. Alan and Sarah collapsed, exhausted but triumphant. As dawn broke, they looked around. The stone circle was calm, the air clear. For the first time in years, Eldritch Hollow felt free. The oppressive grip of Mr. Black finally lifted. They had done it. They had broken the cycle and freed the town from the shadows that had plagued it for centuries. As the town woke up, there was a sense of renewal and hope. Eldritch Hollow, once shrouded in darkness, now faced a brighter future thanks to the courage and determination of two of its residents. Alan and Sarah knew there would be challenges ahead, but they also knew they had faced the heart of darkness and emerged victorious. Eldritch Hollow was their home, and they had saved it from the shadows. Chapter 14. The Veil Lifts. Eldritch Hollow basked in a newfound peace, its streets lively with the sounds of a community reborn. Alan, hailed as a hero, felt a sense of accomplishment and relief. The shadows that had haunted the town were gone, dispelled by the light of their victory at the stone circle. But as the days passed, a subtle, nagging sensation began to grow in the back of Alan's mind. Something was amiss, a piece of the puzzle that didn't quite fit. The town was thriving, yet there were moments, fleeting and elusive, that made him question if everything was truly resolved. One such moment occurred during a quiet evening at the library with Sarah. They were compiling their experiences and findings into a comprehensive chronicle when Alan noticed an odd expression on Sarah's face. It was brief, a flicker of something he couldn't quite place, but it unsettled him. "Sarah, is everything okay?" Alan asked, his voice tinged with concern. Sarah looked up, her usual warm demeanor back in place. "Yes, of course. Why do you ask?" Alan hesitated. "I don't know. For a moment you seemed different." Sarah laughed it off. "Just tired, I suppose. It's been a long journey for both of us." Yet Alan couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to it. He decided to keep a closer eye on things, especially around Sarah. Days turned into weeks, and the unease in Alan's heart grew. He started noticing small, inexplicable occurrences. Books misplaced in the library, strange symbols appearing in the margins of their notes, and Sarah's increasingly distant demeanor. Determined to find answers, Alan began his own covert investigation, revisiting the archives and the stone circle, searching for anything he might have missed. What he found sent a chill down his spine. Buried in an obscure text, he discovered a reference to a guardian entity, a being bound to the original deal made with Mr. Black. This entity was tasked with ensuring the continuation of the pact, manipulating events from the shadows. Armed with this knowledge, Alan confronted Sarah. "Sarah, tell me the truth. Are you tied to Mr. Black? Are you the guardian mentioned in the texts?" Sarah's reaction was not what he expected. Instead of denial or surprise, she simply sighed, a look of resignation in her eyes. "I had hoped to spare you this, Alan. Yes, I am bound to the pact, but not in the way you think." Chapter 15. The Guardian's Confession. Sarah's revelation hit Alan like a physical blow. The woman he had trusted, who had fought alongside him, was linked to the very darkness they had strived to eliminate. How? Why? Alan's voice was a mix of anger and betrayal. Sarah's gaze was somber. "Centuries ago, I was the one who made the original deal with Mr. Black. The prosperity and protection of Eldritch Hollow came at a price. My eternal service as the guardian of the pact." Alan struggled to process her words. "But you helped me break the cycle. You helped free the town." Sarah nodded. "Yes, and that was my true intention. Over the centuries, I've seen the suffering and pain caused by the deal. My role as the guardian became a curse, one I sought to end. Helping you break the cycle was my way of making amends, of ending my own bondage to Mr. Black." The pieces of the puzzle started falling into place for Alan. Sarah's extensive knowledge, her eagerness to help, her brief moments of distance, they all made sense now. "What happens to you now?" Alan asked, a tinge of sadness in his voice. Sarah smiled, a mixture of sadness and relief. "With the pact broken, my bond to Mr. Black is severed. I am free, but my time is also at an end. I stayed alive all these years because of the deal. Now I can finally rest." Tears welled up in Alan's eyes as the realization of losing Sarah, his mentor and friend, sank in. "I can't believe you're leaving. After everything." Sarah reached out, placing a hand on his. "You have a bright future ahead, Alan. Eldritch Hollow is free thanks to you. Remember, even in darkness, there is always a path to light." As Sarah's form began to fade, like a wisp of smoke disappearing into the air, Alan felt a profound sense of loss but also gratitude. Sarah, the guardian of Eldritch Hollow, had sacrificed centuries for the town's well-being, and, in the end, had found her own redemption. Eldritch Hollow had lost a guardian, but gained a legacy of courage and resilience. Alan knew he would carry on Sarah's work, protecting the town and ensuring that its dark past would never repeat itself. As the last traces of Sarah vanished, Alan stood alone in the library, surrounded by the history and secrets of Eldritch Hollow. He realized then that Sarah's final act was her greatest, freeing herself and the town from the shackles of a centuries-old curse. In the days that followed, Alan felt a deep sense of responsibility settle upon him. Sarah's role as the guardian had passed, but her legacy remained. He dedicated himself to safeguarding the town's history, ensuring that the lessons learned from their battle with the darkness would not be forgotten. Alan also became a custodian of sorts, a keeper of the balance between the town and the unseen world. He knew that while the immediate threat was gone, the need for vigilance remained. Eldritch Hollow had been a focal point of supernatural forces, and it was Alan's role now to ensure that such forces did not gain a foothold again. The town continued to thrive, its people living their lives free from the oppressive shadow that had once hung over them. They were unaware of the true nature of the battle that had been fought for their souls, but Alan carried that knowledge with a sense of pride and duty. He often visited the stone circle, now a place of peace and reflection rather than a site of dark rituals. It stood as a monument to their victory and a reminder of the town's resilience. Alan also kept Sarah's story alive, teaching the younger generations about the guardian who had helped save their town. Her tale became a part of Eldritch Hollow's lore, a story of sacrifice and redemption that would be passed down through the ages. As he watched Eldritch Hollow flourish, Alan knew that the darkness might never be fully eradicated, that there would always be shadows lurking at the edges of the light. But he also knew that as long as there were people like Sarah and himself willing to stand against the darkness, the town would always find its way back to the light. Eldritch Hollow had emerged from its darkest chapter into a new era, one of hope and promise. And for Alan, it was just the beginning of a lifelong journey as the guardian of its light. Chapter 16. The Whisper in the Shadows. As Eldritch Hollow settled into its new era of peace and hope, Alan found himself often reflecting on the events that had transpired. He had become the guardian of the town's history and its protector against the unseen forces that once threatened its very existence. The stone circle, a symbol of their triumph, was a place he frequented, finding solace in its quiet strength. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a golden hue over the town, Alan stood within the circle, lost in thought. The breeze carried the laughter of children playing in the distance, a sound that filled him with a sense of accomplishment. Eldritch Hollow was safe, its future bright. But as the twilight deepened, a cold wind whispered through the stones, carrying with it a voice that sent a shiver down Alan's spine. "You see, Alan, I am more than just a mere deal-maker," the voice of Mr. Black murmured, turning the silence of the stone circle into a vessel for his sinister revelations. The chill in Alan's spine deepened as the voice wove through the standing stones, resonating with a truth that was as old as the town itself. "I am a part of this town's fabric, woven into its history and its destiny. You may have broken one cycle, but there are others deeper and more ancient," Mr. Black's voice continued, a low hum that seemed to emanate from the very earth beneath Alan's feet. The very foundation of Eldritch Hollow was built upon sinister ambitions, a dark symphony of greed and power. "My presence here, my shadow, it brings balance." Mr. Black's whisper twisted around Alan, a serpentine promise that tightened around his heart. "Think of it as a counterweight to the devastation wrought by those who founded this town upon the suffering of those who lived in this land before." As the pre-dawn chill began to retreat before the encroaching light, Alan stood motionless within the stone circle, grappling with the echoes of Mr. Black's confession. The words resonated with a haunting truth that seemed to seep into the ground, into the history of Eldritch Hollow itself. The role of guardian, which he had embraced with such fervor, now felt like a mantle woven with threads of doubt. Could it be that his victory was not a liberation, but a disruption of a balance he had yet to fully comprehend? "You see, Alan, I am more than just a mere deal-maker," Mr. Black's voice had said, an eerie whisper that refused to be silenced by logic or reason. "I am a part of this town's fabric, woven into its history and its destiny. You may have broken one cycle, but there are others, deeper and more ancient." The foundation of Eldritch Hollow built on sinister ambitions. This revelation unsettled Alan. The implications were profound. If Mr. Black's presence was indeed the counterbalance to the town's darker origins, what would be the consequence of his absence? For the devastation of those who founded the town to those who had lived in the land before. The words hinted at untold stories, at a history written in the shadows of conquest and subjugation. Was Mr. Black an embodiment of that history, a necessary darkness that kept the past at bay? Alan felt the first seeds of doubt take root in his mind. Was his role as the guardian to protect the town from darkness, or to maintain the delicate equilibrium between the light and the dark? And if Mr. Black was telling the truth, what would become of Eldritch Hollow without his ominous presence?